Sir, I need to see some ID. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area.
I'm sitting on a bench reading a book. What's suspicious about that?
Do you have identification or not?
I'm a psychiatrist at the hospital across the street. I eat lunch here every single day.
I don't care if you're the president. ID now.
Is it because I'm...
Sir, I need to see some ID. Wow. You know, it's a phrase that can just completely change your day, right? A simple request, but it feels so much more like a command. It's the start of an encounter nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to have.
And right there, with that one question back, what's suspicious about that? You see the entire conflict laid out. This isn't going to be a simple chop between two people. No, this is about that fine, blurry line between authority and our individual rights.
So let's dive right into this story. We're calling it The Evaluator and the Officer. And honestly, it's this incredible 8-minute masterclass in power, in law, and maybe most importantly, in the hidden biases that can really drive our actions. Okay, so picture this. It's a gorgeous Wednesday afternoon in Riverside Park. You've got the trees turning those amazing autumn colors, families are out feeding the ducks, people are jogging. I mean, it is the absolute picture of a normal, peaceful day. And right in the middle of it all, there's a man just sitting on a bench, eating a sandwich, reading a medical journal. Totally normal. And that's when he's approached. All right, so let's meet our two main characters here. On one side, you have Dr. Malcolm Pierce. He's 52, a forensic psychiatrist with more than 20 years of experience. And get this, his specialty is literally evaluating the psychological fitness of police officers. He's calm, he's analytical. Then on the other side, we've got Officer Nolan Prescott. He's 29, just 5 years on the force, and his mindset, well, as you're about to see, it's aggressive and authoritarian. I mean, the contrast between these two, it could not be more stark. And here's the kicker, the absolute crucial detail of this whole thing. The entire reason for the stop, it was a lie. Officer Prescott said he was responding to reports of suspicious activity. But when they checked the dispatch logs later, turns out no such reports ever existed. Nope, he just saw a man sitting alone and decided, on his own, that was enough to start an investigation.
So, this is where things really start to escalate. What should have been, a simple request for ID, it just blows up into this test of wills. It becomes a battle over authority, really. A battle over whose version of reality is going to win the day.
I mean, just listen to the officer's choice of words here. He doesn't ask, excuse me, sir, could I see your ID? No, he commands, just comply. Think about that phrasing. It immediately puts Dr. Pierce in the wrong and frames this as a situation where unquestioning compliance is the only possible option. Now, Dr. Pierce could have ended this whole thing in a second, right? His ID was right there in his wallet. But here's the thing. With 23 years of evaluating officers, he knew something really important. He knew that complying with an unlawful order, it just validates the behavior. It tells the officer that, yeah, they can demand anything they want without cause. It basically greenlights the very thing that leads to people's rights getting violated. And this is where Dr. Pierce just completely flips the script. He takes this from a raw power struggle and pivots it onto the rock-solid ground of constitutional law. It becomes a legal lesson right there on a park bench. He basically forces the issue, right? He brings up the central legal question. What gives an officer the right to demand your ID in the first place? Well, the answer to that lies in a really important legal concept called reasonable suspicion. So what does that actually mean in plain English? Well, thanks to Supreme Court cases like Hebel v. Nevada, it means an officer can't just stop you on a hunch or a gut feeling. No way. They have to have specific, concrete facts, things they can actually point to that would make any reasonable person think that a crime is happening, has happened, or is about to happen. Okay, so let's apply that standard right here. What were Dr. Pierce's specific articulable facts? Let's see. He was reading a journal, eating a sandwich, and sitting on a park bench in broad daylight. I mean, come on. None of that comes even close to the legal standard for reasonable suspicion. The entire stop was, legally speaking, completely baseless. So now that his legal argument is just falling apart, Officer Prescott switches gears. He tries a totally different tactic. And in doing so, he basically reveals the unspoken bias that was really driving this whole thing from the very beginning. And I want you to listen to these words really carefully. He says,
This park, you know we get a lot of problems. I'm sure you understand. Now, on the surface, okay, maybe that sounds like an officer just explaining the realities of his job. But this subtext here, oof, it is absolutely impossible to ignore. Yeah, let's just decode what's really being said. When he says problems in this context, that's coded language. It's not so subtly referring to people who look just like Dr. Pierce. And that little phrase, I'm sure you understand, that's an attempt to make Dr. Pierce agree with his own profiling. It's basically saying, you get it, right? You know you're the kind of person we see as a problem. It's a pretty transparent attempt to justify racial profiling. And this is it. This is the turning point. The entire power dynamic of this encounter is about to do a complete 180. And it all hinges on one critical, absolutely unavoidable question. This question, am I free to go or am I being detained? It's like a magic phrase in these situations. It forces the officer to pick a lane. If they say, you're free to go, great, the whole thing is voluntary and you can just walk away. But if they say you're being detained, well, now they have to have that reasonable suspicion we just talked about to back it up. And Officer Prescott, he had nothing. He was totally trapped by the law he was supposed to be enforcing. So what does he do when his authority is challenged and his legal argument has completely collapsed? He does what people in his position often do. He escalates. He reaches for his radio to call for backup. It's a classic move, right? Try to regain control through intimidation when your ego just can't handle being questioned. But he's about to be stopped dead in his tracks. Before Officer Prescott can even key his mic, Dr. Pierce plays his ace. He calmly reveals who he is. And you just have to imagine the shock on that officer's face. He realizes he isn't just hassling some random guy on a bench. No, he is harassing the forensic psychiatrist who literally conducts psychological evaluations for the Metropolitan Police Department, the very guy who decides if officers are fit for duty. And let's be crystal clear about Dr. Pierce's level of experience here. We're not talking about some part-time consultant. This man had professionally evaluated over 2,000 police officers in his career. 2,000. He could spot bias, anger issues, and authority complexes from a mile away because, well, that was his job. And then, as if that wasn't enough, comes the final physical proof. Dr. Pierce hands him the business card. It lays it all out. His name, his MD, his PhD, and his official title as a consultant for the Metropolitan Police Department. You can just imagine Officer Prescott's entire world unraveling in that single moment. So, just like that, the encounter is over. But the consequences? Oh, they were just getting started. For Officer Prescott, those 8 minutes of unchecked bias and aggression, they would turn out to be completely career-ending. I mean, look at this timeline. It shows you just how fast this all came crashing down. It all happened in just 8 minutes. You see the whole progression. The initial approach, the legal challenge from Dr. Pierce, Prescott's use of coded, biased language, the desperate attempt to escalate by calling for backup, and then bam, the stunning reveal. And how does it all end? With Dr. Pierce sitting on that very same bench, making a direct call to internal affairs. And that really leaves us with this one final, powerful question, doesn't it? What happens when the system is forced to evaluate itself? See, this wasn't just another citizen complaint. This was an expert evaluation delivered in real time by someone from inside the system. It forced the department to look in the mirror, and the reflection was being held up by one of its own evaluators. It really makes you wonder, what other huge lessons are just waiting out there, sitting on a park bench?
So, what happens when a police officer stops the one person they should absolutely, under no circumstances, ever stop? Well, today we're going to break down this incredible story. It's about how one kind of random encounter on a park bench, fueled by one man's very unique expertise, set off this huge chain reaction that ultimately held an entire system accountable. Okay, so our story kicks off with something that sounds pretty minor, right? A guy's just sitting in a park, and a cop tells him he has to move along. But here's the thing. This wasn't just any guy. And this one little stop, it spiraled into like a masterclass on how to create institutional change. All because that officer picked the absolute worst person to mess with that day. All right, let's get right into it and meet our main character, Dr. Malcolm Pierce. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Dr. Pierce is a forensic psychiatrist. And get this, he's the expert the police department actually hires to evaluate its own officers. So, he knows the system inside and out. He knows their procedures, their psychology. He probably knows their weak spots better than they do themselves.
So when this officer, Nolan Prescott, unlawfully stops him,
Dr. Pierce doesn't just get mad and yell. Nope. He weaponizes his expertise. He files this formal complaint that's, well, it's less of a grievance and more of a surgical strike. He cites the exact constitutional violations, the procedures, the badge number. He lays it all out so perfectly that there's just no way Internal Affairs can sweep it under the rug.
And you know what? The reaction from Internal Affairs was immediate. The detective on the phone, who actually knew Dr. Pierce from his work with the department, just asks this one critical question. He stopped you? You specifically? You can just imagine the dawning horror in that detective's voice. He knew right then and there what a colossal mistake this was. One of his officers just profiled the guy who literally decides if cops are fit for duty.
Okay, so Dr. Pierce's perfectly crafted complaint basically cracked the door open. But now the investigators are about to use cold, hard data to blow that door right off its hinges. This is where the story shifts from one guy's word against the cops to an undeniable statistical pattern of behavior. First thing they looked at, the body cam footage. And yep, it was an instant replay of exactly what Dr. Pierce said happened. You can see Officer Prescott's aggressive attitude, you can hear his excuses for the stop just kind of fall apart. The bias is just crystal clear. It's all right there on video. But that body cam footage, that was just the appetizer. This next part is where the whole case just explodes. The investigators pull all of Officer Prescott's stop data, and the numbers are just wow. So get this, people of color make up about 42% of the city's population, but they accounted for more than 71% of his stops. The math isn't hard on that one. He was targeting minorities at almost double the rate you'd expect.
And this right here, this is the statistical smoking gun. It's what they call the hit rate. So look at this. When Prescott stopped people of color, only 22% of those stops actually led to an arrest or a ticket. But when he stopped white citizens, that number skyrockets to 75%. The conclusion is just impossible to ignore. He was stopping minorities based on hunches, but he was only stopping white citizens when he was pretty sure they'd actually done something wrong.
So you can imagine what happens next. They sit Officer Prescott down in a room, slide the stat across the table, and basically just ask, "Can you explain this?" And he just crumbles. He tries to talk about high crime areas, officer's instinct, the usual stuff. But there's just no way to justify these numbers. The interview transcript is basically a mess of him trying and failing to talk his way around the facts. So, with that data, which is pretty much irrefutable, the investigation part is over. Now, it's time for the consequences. And just when you think it can't get worse for Prescott, Dr. Pierce delivers the final crushing blow. He submits his own 16-page professional psychological evaluation. In it, he professionally diagnoses all the classic traits of an officer who is psychologically unfit for duty. Authoritarianism, clear bias, no self-awareness, all things he saw firsthand on that park bench. It's the ultimate expert testimony, and it completely seals Prescott's fate. And things moved fast. I mean, look at this timeline. With the video, the data, and that killer psych eval, the department went from the initial complaint to firing him in just 28 days. Less than a month. Now, of course, the police union tried to appeal the firing, but the review board came back with this absolutely genius question. They asked, okay, if we put him back on the street and he does this again, will the union accept liability for the massive lawsuit that's going to follow? And guess what? The union immediately backed down. They knew the financial risk was way too high. The termination stuck. But for Dr. Pierce, this was never just about getting one guy fired. He knew this wasn't a bad apple situation. Prescott was a symptom of a much bigger problem, a rotten barrel, if you will. So he zoomed out. He took his aim off of one officer and pointed it at the entire 12th precinct. And he did this by filing a second complaint. But this time, he didn't go to Internal Affairs. He went to the Civilian Complaint Review Board. This was a strategic move. He was now targeting the entire culture of the 12th precinct, their failure to supervise, their failure to investigate prior complaints. And what that board found was staggering. They ran the numbers for the whole precinct, and, well, it looked almost identical to Prescott's personal stats. The same skewed stop rates, the same disparity in arrests. It turned out Prescott wasn't an outlier at all. He was the norm. His behavior wasn't the exception, it was the culture of the precinct. The fallout from this was huge. The board's report was absolutely scathing, and it led to a whole wave of reforms that were not up for debate. The precinct commander? Replaced. They brought in brand new training protocols,
And maybe most importantly, they mandated independent monitoring of all stops and quarterly reporting on the data. Real top-down change.
Okay, so with the reforms rolling out, there was really only one thing left to do: put a price tag on the original violation. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story, the legacy of that one day on a park bench measured in both dollars and real lasting change. About 6 months later, Dr. Pierce files a federal civil rights lawsuit, and the city, facing this mountain of evidence that their own investigation had uncovered, didn't even try to fight it. They settled, and they settled fast, for $680,000. That became the official cost of violating Dr. Pierce's rights. But for Dr. Pierce, it was never really about the money. It was a tool. It was about accountability. He famously said, "If I refuse the money, I'm telling them violations are free." He wanted to make the city feel the financial sting, to make them understand that violating someone's rights has a real, tangible cost. And the ripple effects from that single encounter on the bench were just immense. I mean, Prescott never worked in law enforcement again. The 12th Precinct's data actually got better over the next couple of years. That body cam footage, it's now used as a national training tool on what not to do. And the whole case became a textbook example in law enforcement psychology.
You know, Dr. Pierce's final message, whenever he talked about this, was really simple but powerful. He said that rights only matter if people are actually willing to stand up and assert them. Accountability isn't just going to happen on its own. It has to be demanded, even when it's hard, and maybe especially when it's easier to just let it go. When you look at this whole story, it's clear that real change doesn't just come from one place. It's a chain reaction, right? It takes individual citizens asserting their rights, it takes internal investigators who are willing to actually follow the data wherever it leads, and it takes leaders at the top who are willing to enforce genuine accountability. And that really just leaves us with one final question to think about. If you were in that situation, on that park bench, being given an unlawful order by an officer, what would you have done?